if we drink and drive, you can drink up to a blood alcohol level of 0.05 and you're still allowed to drive a car. Now, some people at 0.05 are actually a bit pissed and others are quite capable of driving, but we've decided that's the level where it is safe to drive, and different jurisdictions have different levels. However, if you take marijuana, either medically or otherwise, and it has THC in it, if you have any amount of that in your system and you are picked up by the police and they do a drug test, then you face a severe punishment. An ex-guest, I believe, wants this to change. He's the member for the Western Metropolitan region and a member of the Legalise Cannabis Party. David Ettershank, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Tom. How are you?
Sorry, Ettershank, I mispronounced your name. So, just tell me, does all medicinal cannabis contain THC or just some of it?
Most medicinal cannabis contains THC. A lot of people get it for one of the other drugs, which is called CDC. But even then, there tends to be trace elements of THC. And
right.
those trace elements are generally more than enough to get you pinged if you get pulled up at a random drug test.
Well, do you think, or is it possible in the way that we have a blood alcohol level, a limit of 0.05 for drinking, is it possible to have a permissible level of THC for taking medicinal cannabis?
Look, there are countries where that is the case. I think New Zealand, in their legislation, were looking at that, and there's countries in Europe where they actually measure that amount, but it is fairly, it's a disputed science. What we're saying, though, is Tom, basically, look, if you're impaired, you shouldn't be driving, and the cops should act.
But how do they test if you're impaired? I mean, in the old days, prior to breath testing machines for drinking, you had to get out and walk in a straight line and touch the tip of your nose with your finger and do things like that, and the cop would have to make a judgment on the spot. Are you saying that a policeman should do a similar thing here?
They can. I mean, look, this has actually been the law in Tasmania for a couple of years now, and it's happened with almost no publicity and no controversy, and everyone seems pretty happy with it. But in Canada, they have what they call the standard field sobriety test, which takes about 5 minutes, and it's the sort of thing you're talking about. But we're basically saying, look, like normally if the cops pull you up, it's like you've been going too fast or too slow, or you've been weaving on the road or whatever. That's normally a pretty good indication that there's a problem.
Right. So let's say you are driving at 10 kilometres an hour and weaving in and out of your lane, and the cops stop you and they give you a drug test and find that you do have THC in your blood. If the cops concluded from your driving that you're obviously impaired, is that the sort of thing that you're saying the way it should work?
Yeah, so that's perfectly reasonable. We're not trying to defend dangerous driving or impaired driving. What we're saying is, look, in Victoria, they passed a law some years ago which said that a registered doctor can prescribe cannabis as a medicine. So we're only talking about people who've had prescribed medicine. And what we're saying is that that should be treated in exactly the same way as an opiate or a benzodiazepam or, the Valium. There are exemptions in the Road Safety Act for those other drugs where they've been prescribed by a doctor, and we're saying cannabis should be treated the same way.
Right.
That's all.
Well, what if it's a random breath test? Like they often have random breath and drug tests. I've been drug tested where they swab the inside of your mouth and see if there's any drugs apart from alcohol there. Let's say someone there is picked up and they test positive for THC, and they say, here's my prescription. I take cannabis for medicinal reasons. So there's no reason for pulling the person up other than they're pulling everybody up to test them. If someone tests positive to THC, do they then give them some sort of impairment test then on the side of the road to see if they should be driving?
They could do, but basically what we're saying, Tom, is in the absence of any sign of impairment, if that person can pull out a prescription for cannabis from a registered practitioner, from a registered doctor, then in the absence of any sign of impairment, they should be free to go.
But see, I have a problem with that because, with alcohol, we've made it objective. We've said if you have a blood alcohol concentration above 0.05, you cannot drive. And so that just makes the rule the same for everyone. Now, some people at 0.05 are actually quite drunk, and some people could be 0.1 and probably regard themselves as safe, even if they're not. But I mean, here we're sort of saying, look, I don't think I'm impaired, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, look, there's some validity to that, Tom, but I guess the point to recognise is that with alcohol, it's in your system for a very short period of time because it's water soluble. Likewise, methamphetamine, it's only in your system for a very short period of time. THC is in your body fat. And so you could have had a dose of cannabis under prescription a week before, and you'll still test positive.
Yeah, okay.
And that's obviously a big problem. And what we're seeing as a result is that people have got scripts for cannabis. It's the most effective drug they can access for, let's say, management of pain, but they'll take an opiate, which is far, far more harmful because they're safer with that because they know that if they get pulled up and they're not impaired, they'll be free to go.
Okay, yeah, I see your point.
So it's a sort of perverse consequence of badly drafted legislation.
I still think, though, there has to be some sort of impairment test. I think self-declaration, I am not impaired, is not going to be good enough. Anyway, I mean, does your bill...
We're comfy with that, mate. We're comfy with that.
Okay.
If I don't do an impairment test, rock and roll.
Right, but we have to come up with one. Now, very quickly, is the state government going to back you in this? Because obviously if the government backs you, you'll get the bill through. If it doesn't, you probably won't. Has the state government sort of said what they think about this?
Look, this was discussed with the state government about 18 months ago, so before my time, and I believe there was actually fairly extensive agreement as to how it could work, and that would be on a trial basis, but for various political reasons it got deep-sixed. So we're hoping to sort of pretty much pick up that conversation where it was left off at that time.
Okay. And finally, I believe it's your first week in Parliament. You've only been recently elected. How have you found it?
My head stopped spinning. But look, it's really interesting. Tom, it's really interesting. And we're sort of looking forward to not only advancing, the whole question of regulating cannabis and getting that normalised. Because, I mean, there's 1 million Victorians a year use cannabis. So it's about, normalising this and regulating it appropriately. And so we're really excited about the prospect of sort of working with the government and the crossbenchers and the opposition to try and come up with just a sensible way of regulating the situation.
All right, thank you for your time. David Ettershank there, member for Western Metropolitan Region and a member of the Legalise Cannabis Party. Well, look, I agree with him on the point. If someone takes medicinal cannabis and a week later there's a bit of THC still in their system, it would seem unfair to disqualify them from driving. But this is the problem. We need to both measure the amount of THC and then measure the impairment. And that's not so easy to do. Do we want to go back to the old days of walking a straight line on the side of the road, touch the tip of your nose with your finger, recite your name and birth date and so forth? I don't know. But I mean, that's what they used to do in the 1960s. Anyway,